the title, that has been given to me to actually speak on, is actually entitled, the attributes, of a Sampajanna mind, and this, of course, is actually a very, very, interesting, and also it is also a very, very deep and profound subject in the Dhamma as well, because we're actually going to, we are crossing into the realm of Sampajanna, which is a very important, and it is a very, very essential teaching, of the Buddha. If you actually read the suttas, right, in the various discourses of the Buddha, invariably you see that the Buddha actually makes reference to Sampajanna, and this word Sampajanna, right, is actually closely related with the word sati, So, in the Pali canon, if you read the teachings of the Buddha, right, invariably the Buddha always makes reference to sati sampajanna, So these two actually go hand in hand, because they are actually very important. They are actually very important. I would say, very important qualities, for one to develop, in tandem, in order for one to be able to know and see the Dhamma. So as you know, right, this word sati, I'm sure many of you actually understand what sati means, which is actually mindfulness, and we actually can see from this Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 10, in terms of where the Buddha actually expounded in detail in terms of, how our mindfulness or sati can actually be established, in the four foundations of mindfulness, mainly, where the Buddha actually, encourage us to establish, our mindfulness, in respect of our body, our feelings, our mind, as well as mind objects, So these are the four bases, on which the Buddha has actually taught in terms of how we should establish our mindfulness, which means at every single moment in time, we must most make sure that we anchor our mindfulness on these four foundations, So that's where, the mindfulness needs to be established, But of course, mindfulness alone is not good enough, right? Because just being mindful, in terms of, how, for example, how your sense bases react to the sense objects. You may actually collect the data, right? Like, for example, or you hear something, you see something, and then you feel something, perhaps, it is unpleasant or neutral feelings. And then because of this, there's actually unwholesome qualities arise in your mind, that, and then that, for example, there's lobha, dosa, moha that arises in your mind. And because of this, you are mindful of all these qualities that have arisen in your mind. But just being mindful of this itself does not lead you to any knowledge or any sort of wisdom, right? You just barely know. These are just data points, like very much like, the binary codes that, the computers, get 1010, all the data are there. But the question here is there actually, what must you do further, other than just being mindful, So that's where this clear comprehension comes about. This sampajanna comes in, which is actually very important, because this is the part, where where the data are being processed, to actually for us to see with more clarity, in terms of the true underlying nature, of what happens, or what arises, on this, based on these four foundations of mindfulness, and this is where sampajanna is actually, very important, So if you can actually look at the word sampajanna, right? Just maybe, just to give an idea, in terms of how this word is derived. If you actually look at, the Pali language itself, this sam is actually a prefix, sam. Sam actually means together, completely or thoroughly, So, which means some suggest, the meaning of something that's complete, something that's actually thorough, And the word pajanya, it actually comes from the root word nya, which actually means to know. So when you actually combine these two words together, like sampajanya, it actually connotes and means like clear comprehension, or full awareness, full awareness or clear comprehension. So then the question that we need to actually answer is, what is the extent or scope of this sampajanna, right? Okay, does it mean that sampajanna just means full awareness, Like for example, when you walk, you're just being aware that you're walking, or whether you are walking fast, or whether you're walking slow. For example, if you intend to actually go forward, or if you intend to see something, or you turn your attention to something, or even for example, if say greed or hatred, arises in you, you just take note. Oh, this has actually happened. So just being fully aware, that whatever happens, in your sixth sense basis, right? And that itself is actually clear comprehension. That means you're just being fully aware, and just to see, for example, if anger arises, I just know, okay, anger has arisen in me. So anger has arisen, it subsists, and after that, it just ceases. So just being aware, fully aware of it, so does that actually constitute Sampajanna, in the teachings of the Buddha, because as the essence and of the very, very the very, very true essence of the Buddha's teaching is actually for us to realize the Dhamma, in order for us to understand the true underlying nature, of the existence, so that we can, have this dispassion and disillusion, so that we are able to actually then eradicate craving and clinging, so that we can actually extricate ourselves from samsara, right? So the question now is, just by being fully aware, of whatever that you do, whether it's by body or whether it's, through your mind, if you, for example, if you're walking, or whether you are standing or sitting or lying down, you're just being fully aware, and for example, if anger or greed arises and you just being aware, it has risen, and just watch, and after that, it disappears, just take note, oh, it has risen, it has subsisted, and it has actually then, it has actually ceased, or it has actually disintegrated. So that is the question, right? Is that really Sampajanna, by just being fully aware? And nowadays, if you actually go for any meditation classes, right, depending on which Buddhist school or lineage you go to, potentially, different teachers will teach you different things. Some will teach you, maybe, you shouldn't contemplate at all, just watch with bare awareness, If, for example, if the anger has arisen, just watch anger. And once the anger is gone, or just know it's gone, And don't actually contemplate too much about it. Just watch. Where it comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. So that is actually being fully aware, right? But is that really the scope of Sampajanna? Is that really clear comprehension that the Buddha has actually taught, more than 2,600 years ago, where the Buddha actually taught about Sampajanna? Is that really the scope of Sampajanna? Just watching come and go, is that really what the Buddha taught, and does that actually lead to final liberation? So that is an interesting question for us to answer, right? Sampajanna, it's so interesting, right? The question here is, some people say Sampajanna is just being aware, just watch only, passively, come and go, you don't do more than that, you don't have to contemplate anything. Just know that it comes, it goes, means it's impermanent, it's anicca. So by just looking at anicca alone, it's good enough for me to attain liberation. So the question is that really the true essence of Sampajanna intended by the Blessed One, So that's the question we need to answer, right, in this Dhamma discussion. So for us to actually understand what it means, we need to go back to the suttas, right? That is our primary reference, right? So first of all, let me just refer you to this this sutta. This is actually extracted from DN 16, which records the last days of the Buddha, when the Buddha was about to attain Parinibbana, the final Parinibbana, right, in Kushinara, So this sutta actually records what the Buddha actually told, or, exhorted or reminded the monks, before the Buddha passed into Parinibbana, right? So it is a very moving sutta, from DN 16. So I just want to go through with you, in terms of what the Buddha intended in terms of Sampajanna. But before that, let me just have a show of hands. How many of you think that clear comprehension is just being fully aware? That means whatever that anger or greed arises in you, just take note. Oh, it comes, it goes, it has arisen, it has ceased. And that itself is Sampajanna. Who actually thinks, how many of you actually think Sampajanna is that? Or is there more than that in terms of Sampajanna? I want to see your show of hands. How many of you think it's actually just being fully aware? Just sit there, cross-legged, and then if, for example, if you hear something, that you don't like, there's something unpleasant being spoken about you, you get angry, and you just watch. Anger has arisen. It has arisen, it has persisted, and then after that it ceases. That itself is being fully being practicing Sampajanna. How many of you think that is the scope of Sampajanna? Or is that one of that? Okay, maybe we'll go into Sutta and understand this better, huh? So from this DN 16, see what the Buddha told the monks is that under this para 13, right? Okay, see here the Buddha, he says, is recorded in the suttas. The Blessed One addressed the bhikkhu saying, mindful shall you dwell, bhikkhus, clearly comprehending, thus I exhort you. That means the Buddha already made two references. One is actually mindful shall you dwell, means sati. You must always dwell with mindfulness, sati. But the Buddha didn't stop at sati. The Buddha says clearly comprehending. That means sampajanna. Thus I exhort you. So and then the Buddha says, and how bhikkhus is a bhikkhu mindful. And the Buddha says when he dwells contemplating the body in body, earnest, clearly comprehending and mindfully. After having overcome desire, sorrow, then he dwells contemplating feelings, the mind and mind objects, which is actually the four foundations of mindfulness, like I mentioned to you, like in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 10, the Buddha spoke in great length about this, this sati, the four foundations of mindfulness. So here the Buddha is actually telling the bhikkhus that you shall establish your mindfulness on these four basis, or four foundations of mindfulness, which means you must always ensure your mind is always anchored at the present moment on these four things. What happens to your body, your feelings, that means whether you have a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling, and then in your mind, the citta-nupassana, whether there's any lobha, dosa, moha that arises or not. And also in terms of the mind objects, which is translated as mind objects, but actually a better translation is phenomena, where you just take note, what happens at the sixth sense basis, and you contemplate, and through your six sense basis, the five aggregates, So that is actually what the Buddha highlights in terms of mindfulness. But the Buddha never actually stopped short at mindfulness. Buddha continues, and how bhikkhus does a bhikkhu have clear comprehension? Okay, then the Buddha says, when he remains fully aware of his coming and going, he's looking forward and looking away. When he bends or stretches, or when the monk wears his robe, or where he carries the bhat, the bowl for the pindabat, or is eating or drinking, or whether he's actually chewing or savoring his food, or whether he's defecating or urinating, or whether he's walking, standing, sitting, lying down, going to sleep, keeping awake, whether he speaks a lot, or whether he's speaking, or whether he's being silent, where he keeps a noble silent. If he's aware of all this that he's doing, then he's said to have clear comprehension. So that sets the first, the stage, right, for us to understand clear comprehension. Because in this case, the Buddha actually describes clear comprehension as just being aware what you do. For example, when the monk puts on the robe, and then takes his the bhat, the bowl, and he goes from pindabat, and when he's walking, he's aware, step by step he's walking, and then he knows where his eyes are, whether downcast, and when he's bending, or when he's walking, or when he when he has come back to the monastery, he sits down, and he actually starts chewing, eating, or when he actually walks, or sitting or lying, or going to sleep, or when he speaks, or when he keeps a noble silence, he's fully aware of every single action that he does, by body, speech, and mind, And the Buddha says, if the monk does that, then he's said to have clear comprehension. So the Buddha says, mindful should you dwell, bhikkhus, clearly comprehending, thus I exhort you. So if you read this DN 16 itself, it does give the impression as though clear comprehension is just being fully aware, right? You just, when you do something, you're just aware whether I'm walking, or whether I'm sitting or lying down, or whether I'm actually speaking, or whether I'm keeping silent, or whether I'm looking at something, or hearing something, or smelling something, or tasting something. You're just being mindful only. You don't have to do anything. Just watch it come and go. So if you actually read this DN 16, right? So clear comprehension actually means just bare awareness, right? Nothing more than that, So that is the first sutta I want to share with you, And as you know, the Buddha, he's a wonderful teacher, right? And he actually caters his Dhamma teachings, in accordance with the temperaments and the inclinations of the audience, And so that's why when you read a sutta, you can't just look at one sutta and form conclusion, but you need to look at a selection of suttas that provide, the holistic view, a comprehensive view of on a certain topic. So this is just one sutta that the Buddha talks about full Sampajanna being in a way equated with just being fully aware, But is that really the case? I want to show you other suttas. You see, okay, and the other sutta I will share with you is from Samyutta Nikaya, and the connected teachings of the Buddha. Samyutta Nikaya 45.165, right? Here the Buddha actually was speaking to the monks about dukkha, about suffering, or not about suffering, but basically it's more like, unsatisfactoriness, lah. It's not really suffering in that sense, but it's translated by Maurice Walsh, as suffering, but it's actually more like, unsatisfactory, it's actually not completely satisfactory. There's always something that's amiss, That's something that you cannot find true happiness, So, the Buddha says amongst there are these three kinds of dukkha. What three? Dukkha caused by pain, the dukkha lah, and suffering caused by formations or conditioned existence. This is sankhara dukkha. Because it's precisely of sankhara, is that we are all fabricated, we are actually conditioned and fabricated. That's why, that's why it's dukkha. We can never have something that's truly a permanent, unchanging self. It's because of we are conditioned, by causes and conditions. That's why we are sankharas, right? We are all conditioned. And because of this conditioned existence, there's actually dukkha. Because once something is actually conditioned, and is fabricated, and is conditioned, and is something that's constructed, it actually subject to change, because the conditions that actually form this sankhara, right, they're subject to change. So that's why the Buddha says there's dukkha. And the third one is dukkha due to change, the viparinama dukkha. And this viparinama dukkha, actually then refers to anything that actually comes together and originates, and it comes together, that's formed through causes and conditions, it is always liable to deteriorate, things deteriorate, this has the meaning of deterioration, like for example, you have, something, maybe a new handphone, or new car, wow, like an EV, wow, that's really nice, wow, everybody looks at your new car and everybody's so, so amazed, right? What a wonderful car, or what a splendid phone you have. But over time, it's subject to change. Viparinama, or the cars get scratched, and the paint actually gets worn out, and your phone eventually also gets, I don't know, maybe get hacked or something, and it's no longer usable. It's viparinama, you can't possibly have something forever the same, because it's conditioned, by causes and conditions. You can't have a permanent, unchanging self. It's non-self in nature, That's why the Buddha says it's dukkha. And the Buddha says it's for the full comprehension and clear understanding, Again, you see the Buddha use the word clear comprehension, which is actually sampajanna, sampajanna, an ending and abandonment of this three form suffering, that the Noble Eightfold Path is to be cultivated. It's because that we need to have full comprehension and clear understanding of these three types of dukkha, that the ending of and abandonment of this suffering, that the Noble Eightfold Path, is to be cultivated. That's why we cultivate Noble Eightfold Path, because the purpose is for us to understand and a full comprehension, of these three types of suffering, so that we are able to then be able to end, the dukkha, because we understand and we therefore, we know the intrinsic nature, and therefore, we cling less, to these sankharas. We're able to let go, and we are disillusioned, and we develop this passion, towards sankharas, So if you see from this dukkha, this sutta itself, the Buddha is actually using this clear comprehension in the sense that it is more than just full awareness, right? Because by just being fully aware, you can't possibly, have the clear comprehension or clear understanding in that sense, right? If you're just looking at things come and go, it is not really in the sense, of having this full comprehension that will actually then cause wisdom to arise, So you can see from this sutta that this Sampajanna is used in a different context. It's more than just full awareness, but here the Buddha uses this Sampajanna as an essential element in order for us to realize dukkha, so that we are able to achieve, the full liberation, and the and to be liberated from samsara, truly, and in the ultimate sense, So you can see here, the Buddha uses the word Sampajanna, in the different sense, which is towards developing wisdom, So we can see this sutta itself, again, the Buddha actually uses Sampajanna in the different contexts, not just fully aware, but it has to be cultivated, for us to have a clear understanding of the nature of dukkha. Okay? And again, you see from this Iti Vuttaka number 16, again the Buddha makes reference to Sampajanna, but in this case, the Buddha actually uses the word appropriate attention, which is what we call yoniso manasikara, right? I'm sure many of you, if you actually, if you meditate or you actually study the Dhamma, you know this yoniso manasikara, is translated as appropriate attention, And this yoniso manasikara, it is something that you practice in order for you to develop Sampajanna. Okay, so in this case, in this sutta, the Buddha actually then also makes reference to this Sampajanna being practiced through yoniso manasikara. So the Buddha says, I don't envision any other single factor like yoniso manasikara as doing so much for a monk training. A monk striving, appropriately. That means, using this yoniso manasikara attains the ending of stress, So, you see, in this sutta, the Buddha actually uses Sampajanna, in the sense where it truly liberates, someone by generating or cultivating wisdom, through this yoniso manasikara. So we see this Sampajanna itself, in this context, it's not just being fully aware of something, but you must also do something more in order for you to then develop wisdom, right? So that is something also interesting for us to take note, that this Sampajanna is not just it's not just being fully aware, but there's also Sampajanna that needs to be practiced in order for us to actually cultivate the true wisdom, in order for us to attain liberation from samsara. You see, so now you can see there is a range already, right, from this sutta. On the one hand, we actually have Sampajanna where you're just being fully aware, but another range, where Sampajanna actually means, that it is more than just being fully aware, but you need to understand, the true nature of existence, by actually, in a way, you need to then invoke wisdom in order for you to understand the true nature of existence, and this is, through cultivating this Sampajanna. So Sampajanna now, we see from the suttas there's a range, from just being barely aware, and the other end of the Sampajanna means that you must actually then cultivate, and try to, in a way, generate, that wisdom, that true knowledge, that true wisdom, for you to understand the true nature of existence, which are sankharas, which are conditioned, true causes and conditions. So we have this range, And if you see from this SN 36.8, again, this sutta, you can see that it's even more evident, it's even clearer if you read this sutta, that actually the Buddha when he uses the word Sampajanna, there's actually a range, between just being fully aware, and cultivating Sampajanna that actually, will develop, wisdom for the tree of wisdom to arise, So, if you see 36.8, in this sutta, right, it actually refers to a day, when Buddha was dwelling at Vesali, in the great forest at the gabled house, and in the evening, he after he had arisen from his seclusion, in deep meditation, he went to the sick room and sat down at the prepared seat, and then he actually told the monks, "Oh monks, mindfully and clearly comprehending should a monk spend his time, So which means what the Buddha is telling the monks is that whenever you actually, when you're not doing any duties, when you actually are cultivating your spiritual qualities. So when you're doing this, the Buddha says you must dwell with sati sampajanna. This is my injunction to you. This is my advice to you. That you should whenever you are practicing, you must always have sati sampajanna. Even for example, you're doing your tasks as well. Doing your duties, you must always have this sati sampajanna. So the Buddha then continues, but how is a monk mindful? Then the Buddha then, of course, goes into these 4 foundations of mindfulness, which I actually mentioned to you just now, on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, right? As recorded in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 10. And if you read the second paragraph, it says, how is a monk clearly comprehending? Again, it's the same thing as what I showed you just now in terms of, being aware when you're walking, when you're sitting, when you're lying down, when you're carrying your butt, going on a pindabat, when you're eating, drinking, chewing, you're aware when you're speaking or when you're observing noble silence, all these you must actually be clearly comprehending, means being fully aware what you're doing. But you see, in this sutta, what's interesting is that the Buddha doesn't just stop short at these 2 paragraphs, like what you saw in DN 16, when the Buddha was about to pass into Parinibbana. Probably he told the monks in a more abridged version, just these 2. But in this, as Samyutta Nikaya, you see, the Buddha doesn't just stop at being fully aware, no. You see, the Buddha continues, if a monk does mindful and clearly comprehending, which means if you have sati sampajanna, when a pleasant feeling has arisen in me, you must actually then contemplate, this feeling is conditioned, not unconditioned. Conditioned by what? Even by this sense impression, which means this feeling is actually conditioned by what? Sense impression here means contact. So feeling arises because of contact, it is conditioned. And this contact indeed is impermanent, compounded, dependently arisen, But if this pleasant feeling that's arisen is conditioned by a sense impression that's impermanent, compounded, and dependently arisen, how could such a pleasant feeling be permanent, you see? So, you see, the Buddha here didn't just ask the monk to just stop at being fully aware, But whenever a pleasant feeling arises in the mind, for example, you see like a plate of food you like, right, or spaghetti or your favorite dish, and this pleasant feeling arises in me, then you need to ask yourself, how does that pleasant feeling arise, Oh, that feeling is conditioned, is dependently arisen. It arises because of contact. And how does contact arise? Oh, it's because of coming together between, the sense object, which is a plate of spaghetti, and, my eye base, and the consciousness that arises, because of this, So the coming of the tree between the sense object, sense base, and the eye consciousness, and that itself is actually contact. And it's because of contact that the feeling arises. So then you should contemplate that if this pleasant feeling, it arises because it's conditioned upon this contact, and this contact is also dependently arisen, and it is constructed, right, because you need to see the plate of spaghetti with your eye base and the eye consciousness that arises, because you see it with attention, and because of this, then the contact arises. So because this feeling, is conditioned by contact itself, which is also something that has actually been compounded and dependent arisen. How can you say that this feeling has a self? That it is there without conditions and is actually permanent, unchanging, and you can forever expect it not to change. You can't have that. It's because of this. That's why, the Buddha says, once you contemplate this, you know that this pleasant feeling, it is fleeting, it is not there forever, and it's something definitely is not, it doesn't have a self, It's precisely because it's conditionally arisen, and is subject to change and cessation, Once the conditions that cause this pleasant feeling to arise change, and inevitably they do, then this pleasant feeling also dissipates, and it actually then changes, So you can't hold on to it, and the more you hold on to it, the more you crave for it, the more suffering, you actually generate for yourself, And because of this craving and clinging that you have, right, because of this, it generates the energy for more becoming, And because of becoming, there's birth. And because there's birth, there's actually old age, sickness, death, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That's what the Buddha says. So the whole thing is because we don't understand about this non-self, That's why we are always in this veil of ignorance. We are always shackled by this ignorance that, there's always a self, in everything that we experience. We don't want things to change. We expect everything to be the same. Oh, I want my I have a wonderful family, I have friends, I've got my job, I've got everything that's fine for me, and I don't want this to change, and we cling to this, with all our might, that we would be, and we expect this to be self, that is permanent, unchanging. But if you look at it, and you contemplate this, in terms of how this arises through causes and conditions, and to see the non-self, the intrinsic non-self nature, then you would sooner, gradually, you feel dispassion towards this, just and it's subject to change, truly, because it is actually conditioned, you see. So the Buddha in this sutta actually asks us to practice Sampajanna in that sense, always seeing things, in terms of how does it arise, and how is it arise through causes and conditions, The Buddha is actually asking for us to see through, the dependent origination of all the sankharas we experience, whether it's in terms of our body, our feelings, our mind objects, all these that we are experiencing, or even in terms of our five aggregates, in terms of our body, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. All these five aggregates are nothing but compounded and fabricated and constructed by causes and conditions. This is what we need to see in terms of dependent origination. If you're able to penetrate this into this true understanding, by your confirmed experiential, the confirmed experiential contemplation of all this, if you're able to actually verify this yourself, experientially and personally, through your own experience, then there will come a time that you will break through into the Dhamma, and that's where you have this Dhamma abhisamanya, where you actually then are able to see, the condition arising, of all sankharas, and that is where you have the first glimpse of Nibbana, and that's where your Dhamma eye will arise, you become a Sotapanna, So it all comes from this clear comprehension, this Sampajanna, and you practice it through Yoniso Manasikara. Yoniso means the womb, means you always go back to the origin of it, how does it arise, and if you're able to contemplate this, then one fine day, lo and behold, then you're able to see the condition arising. That's where, this Sotapatti fruition, will arise in you. That's where the eye of the Dhamma Chakku will arise in you, and you become a Sotapanna. So that's why this Sampajanna is something that's so important in the teachings of the Buddha, in this Sati Sampajanna, not just Sati alone, and not just by watching things come and go. For example, I understand that some schools actually teach that you just sit down and just watch come and go, like anger come and go, just watch passively, don't do anything, just watch. Oh, it comes, it goes, therefore anicca, But is this what the Buddha is teaching? If you read the sutta, actually it's not. Clear comprehension, the Sampajanna here. You must understand, the condition arising as cessation, in respect of your 5 aggregates. This is actually what the Buddha teaches in terms of clear comprehension, in terms of Sampajanna. Okay, so you see, in regard to both sense impression and pleasant feeling, he dwells contemplating impermanence, dwells contemplating, with detachment and cessation and relinquishment, and the underlying tendency to lust, in regard to this sense impression and pleasant feeling vanishes, So then the sutta, of course, continues with painful feeling as well, neutral feeling, but the same concepts apply, if you actually read this sutta itself. So we can see that what the Buddha or Blessed One actually teaches us to practice is not just being fully aware of something, with just passive watching come and go, And yeah, you can actually realize anicca, but you are not able to see through the non-self nature, which is anatta, And this anatta, right, is actually the crown jewel of the Buddha's teaching, In all the suttas that you see, the Buddha always emphasizes that you must always practice anatta, which is non-self. You can't always, you cannot just stop short at just watching anicca alone, And of course, if you want to practice anicca, fine, but you must continue to actually then contemplate anicca in terms of dukkha and finally anatta. Then only you actually reach the final destination. But not just by looking at anicca alone, and then you find that, I've really reached the end of my spiritual quest, and I see anicca, and I see everything is impermanent, and therefore, and because of this, I've actually reached Sotapatti because I can see anicca, But if you read the suttas, the Buddha says, a Sotapanna is somebody, who is able to penetrate and see through, the dependent arising of phenomena or sankhara, Only if you're able to see the dependent arising, through this realization, and understanding of non-self in a profound manner, then only the Buddha says that, you have actually entered the stream, of Sotapatti, Otherwise, if you just see anicca alone, it doesn't quite provide you with that true understanding, of the intrinsic nature, of existence, And you just look at anicca, maybe you find that, anicca is just something that's random, Why? Then people ask you, why are things impermanent? Oh, that's how it is, I don't know, And maybe it's random, Or maybe there's being behind it, and that's why it's actually anicca, But you don't understand, about the true underlying nature of existence, which is what the true essence of the Buddha's teaching is actually by truly realizing and understanding this understanding of non-self, which is anatta, And the whole this whole Noble Eightfold Path, as you can see that Buddha has actually enshrined in the suttas, is nothing but just to make us understand that the true underlying purpose is actually for us to actually understand, the anatta, the non-self nature of all existence. And this is where the Buddha actually encouraged and exhorted us to when you practice Sampajanna, you must always ask yourself, how does this happen? How does the feeling happen, So that actually provides a very clear understanding to us in terms of how, we should actually practice this Sampajanna. And again, I just want to also highlight to you about this MN10 again in Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 10. The Buddha also talks about the 4 kinds of Sampajanna, okay? And like I mentioned to you, these 4 kinds of Sampajanna is what I mentioned to you just now, where the Buddha actually talks about, you should be fully aware what you do by body, speech, and mind, okay? So that is very clear, it's the same as the DN16, which I spoke about, the last days of the Buddha, right? So in MN10, the Buddha actually speaks about the 4 kinds of Sampajanna, the same, But in MN10, the Buddha didn't just stop short at full awareness, The Buddha actually went on to say, when you're contemplating these 4 kinds of clear comprehension, which is Sampajanna, you see here, you see this part, he lives contemplating origination things in the body, He lives contemplating dissolution things in the body, and he lives contemplating the origination and dissolution things in the body. Which means you don't just practice Sampajanna by just looking at, being fully aware only, just sit there, watch things come and go, There's not, The Buddha is asking you to contemplate how things originate and how things, dissolve, and how things originate and dissolve, through causes and conditions. How does it happen? If you can see the condition arising, and dependent arising and cessation of this, all these sankharas, or conditioned existence, you'll be able to see that actually there is no true self. Just like, for example, you light a candle, okay? You light a candle on an oil lamp. If you look at the flame itself, can you say that this flame actually, there is a self to it, right? Can you say that there is a self? Because when you say that the flame has a self, means the flame is there and is not dependent on conditions. Like, for example, it needs the candle wax or the oil lamp to light, or you need the wick, or you need the air, for the flame to actually subsist, right, to continue. So, if you say that the flame actually has a self, you are saying that the flame can exist there without conditions, But you cannot say that, right? Because the flame is there because it's dependently arisen, by candle, by the wax, by the oil lamp, by the wick, and because of this, the flame is there, So if you say that there's a self to it, it's also not tenable, So that's why the flame itself is non-self, and the Buddha is actually encouraging us to always see how things arise and cease through causes and conditions. Because once you see that, you know very well that whatever that we see, your five aggregates, it is all conditionally arisen, It because of certain conditions, that's why you have that. So once these conditions change, or ultimately, what we regard as self will change as well. Either change or they basically disappear or they cease, So how can anyone have, how can anyone cling on to anything that is non-self, You are actually setting yourself up for dukkha, If you don't understand about this non-self, this anatta, you're setting yourself up for countless and eons of dukkha, in samsara going forward, Because it is because of this ignorance that actually generates, your sankhara, right? Avijja pachaya sankhara, because of avijja, you don't understand there's ignorance, and because of this, there's actually sankhara. And this sankhara itself, it then, conditions the consciousness, And because of this consciousness, it then needs a nama rupa, It's like the sankhara is like a karmic energy that actually sort of pushes the consciousness into another nama rupa, which is another being, and then nama rupa will then have the six sense bases, and that six sense bases have contact, and that contact again will have feelings, and the feelings itself, once you don't understand, it will then result in craving, and craving becomes clinging, and clinging then becomes being, and from being then it becomes birth, and from birth again we have this old age, sickness, death, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This whole mess starts, to roll on like a vicious cycle because of what? Ignorance. It's because we don't understand about this true non-self nature of existence. We always regard everything as self, self, self. We want everything not to change. We want everything to remain the same. And if something happens, we lament, we cry, we become very upset, How come things didn't go the way I wanted? Didn't I ask you to do this? Why didn't you do this? Or why didn't this happen? I thought I wanted this, why did it happen this way? You become really very distraught, you become very upset, irritated, because you cling on to this self, So if you understand this non-self, like what the Buddha says, you're able to let go gradually, you're able to then relinquish and have dispassion, disillusion, and that's where you actually enter into different stages of enlightenment from Sotapaddi all the way to Arahant, precisely because you understand the non-self, you see. That's why the teaching of the Buddha, this non-self, is so wonderful. It's like a crown jewel of the Buddha's teaching. Nowhere, I can never find any religion in this world that actually teaches about non-self, In fact, most religions will teach you about self, because you have some you need to always have regard to a being, whom you pray to, or whom you actually must have faith in, and it is this being a that you make resolutions or you make vows that you want to return to the teacher, right? So there's always this everlasting being, the self there, or maybe an everlasting heaven there. So this whole premise of this religion is on self, But if you look at Buddha goes the other way around, He's telling you there's non-self, There's nothing you can cling on to, Don't even cling to me, The Buddha says, don't cling to this filthy body of mine, I mean, you should actually learn the Dhamma and practice yourself, but don't cling even to the Buddha, because that is the whole premise of the Dhamma, non-self, it's about non-self. It's not about self, So there's no religion in this world that actually teaches non-self that is so wonderful, that actually enables anyone to let go, and have the peace of mind, So that is so wonderful about the Dhamma that the Buddha has taught, right? And if you see from here, in this SN 36.12, the Buddha also gave this wonderful sutta, about, that in the sky amongst various kinds of wind are blowing, winds from the east, from the west, carrying dust, and some winds are hot, some winds are cold, some winds are gentle and fierce, and it says, similarly, monks, there arise in this body various kinds of feelings, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neutral feeling. So the Buddha is actually making analogy between feelings and the wind that's being blown in the world. Some wind from east, west, some winds carry dust, some winds have no dust, some winds are hot, some winds are cold, some winds are fierce, very like the tornado, some winds are gentle breeze, So the Buddha is actually very remarkable, that he's able to draw these analogies, and what the essence of the Buddha says, the Buddha is asking the monks, practice mindfulness and clear comprehension, means sati sampajanna, the nature of all feelings will he understand, and having penetrated them, he will be taint-free in this life, mature in knowledge, firm in Dhamma's ways. You see, the Buddha is in this sense, in this sutta, for Sampajanna, he's actually asking the monks to understand the nature of all feelings, not just knowing feelings arise and cease, but to know the nature. How do these feelings arise? Like I mentioned to you just now, or because of contact, and how that contact arises, or because of sense-based and sense object and consciousness coming together, the confluence is contact. So if you can look at this, that everything is dependently arisen. You find that everything is empty, Actually, if you look at this non-self, the concept of non-self, or the understanding of non-self, is closely related to this understanding of emptiness, or sunyata, which the Mahayanis, or even the Tibetan, Buddhists, they actually regard this emptiness, as the really a very, very highest form of meditation, where you actually contemplate everything in terms of sunyata. Everything is empty, Even the Mahayana, the Heart Sutta, right? Sutra. If you actually look at it, it is actually about emptiness. It's about that sankharas. In the sutta itself, if you draw the analogy, kong ji zhi se, se ji shi kong, right? It's like all the sankharas are basically empty, truly empty, and it is actually, go back, it ties in precisely and so wonderfully gels and weave so nicely with the Buddha's teaching of non-self. It's because everything is non-self, that's why it's empty. And this accords totally in line and in sync, with what the Mahayanis and Tibetan are teaching in terms of non-self, is sunyata. Precisely because it's non-self. If you're able to see this non-self nature, at the ultimate level, you're already an arahant, means you're able to let go on all sankharas, even your body, because you know that actually there's no self to it and everything is actually empty, So that's why this Heart Sutra also, you must understand the true nature of what it's trying to say, which is actually non-self. It's not just something you recite for protection or whatever, but you must actually understand what is it that's being stated in this Heart Sutra, which is actually non-self, So you can see here is something that's very, very important. And again, you see, the suttas, they are so wonderful. If you read this AN 4.41 on samadhi, okay, the Buddha again highlights there are 4 types of samadhi you actually practice. One is actually, of course, one of the types of samadhi is actually the jhana, okay. We know, the first to the 4th jhana. And then another type of samadhi is actually where you see light, and that's where you practice a psychic power, okay. I mean, the one I'll not go into it. But what is important, I want to draw the difference here about the third and the fourth kind of samadhi, you know. The Buddha says, what is the development of samadhi that when developed and pursued leads to the attainment of knowledge and vision, you know. Sorry, these two. It says here, what is the development of samadhi that when developed and pursued leads to mindfulness and alertness? That means what is the samadhi you practice that it leads to mindfulness and alertness. Means it actually sharpens your sati and your alertness. Okay, this is the case where feelings are known to the monk as they arise, known as they persist, known as they subside. Okay, you see, it's very, very important. Perceptions are known to him as they arise, known to persist, and they subside. You know, thoughts are known to him as they arise, persist, and subside. So the Buddha says, if you just sit down and just be a passive observer, you know, when, for example, when painful feeling arises, you just watch. Oh, painful feeling has a reason, you know, and it's there. Then after a while, it goes off. You know, and for example, if a pleasant feeling arises, it has a reason, is there, it goes off. Then perceptions also, you think about something. For example, you think about, your friends, or you think about, something that you haven't done. Then you think, perceptions are there, it's there, it has a reason, is there, it goes off. So if you practice this sort of samadhi, the Buddha says it leads to sati, and as well as alertness. Sati, sampajanna, but only, at the level of just being fully aware only. Okay. That's the samadhi, third type of samadhi. But you compare and contrast that with the fourth type. The Buddha says, and what is the development of samadhi, that leads to the ending of the affluence of the asava, And the asava here, of course, refers essentially to, to your defilements, okay? Your affluence, your asavas, okay? The Buddha says this is a case when the monk remains focused on arising and falling away with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates, which means your form, your feelings, your perceptions, your sankhara, your fabrications, as well as in terms of a consciousness, your volitional formations. So this is where the Buddha says, if you practice this samadhi, where you actually contemplate on how your 5 aggregates arise, in how they cease, true causes and conditions. This is the samadhi that will lead to the ending of your affluence, or your defilements, where you are able to then uproot this, and attain the various stages of enlightenment, and get out of samsara. You see, so these are the 4 developments of concentration. So if you look from here, if you develop just the bare, awareness, and just being fully aware of, the 5 aggregates, they arise and, and they stay and they cease, If you just passively watch only, then the Buddha says that you are just, sharpening, your mindfulness and your alertness, But it does not lead to the ending of suffering, But only when you practice the samadhi, where you understand in terms of the rising and falling, for example, how do the 5 aggregates arise? What are the conditions that cause the arising of the 5 aggregates, and how do they actually cease through causes and conditions? If you're able to see this, that means you're able to see the non-self nature of the 5 aggregates, that is empty, doesn't have a permanent unchanging self, That's where, the Buddha says, if you practice it this way, then it leads to the ending of affluence. So you can see here, Sampajanna, there is a range, between just being fully aware, at the same, and all the way up to the other end of the spectrum or range of Sampajanna, where, you develop Sampajanna, as a means to cultivate and develop the arising of wisdom through this uniso manasikara, through this appropriate attention as to why they arise, how do they arise, And if you're able to see this, then you're able to see the non-self nature, of conditioned phenomena, and that's where, you're able to then see, the underlying emptiness of all these conditioned phenomena. There's nothing that is worth clinging to, and the conditions is precisely because they're conditioned. That's why they invariably, inevitably, they will change, and and they will even cease one day. And if you know about this, then you grow disillusion, you have dispassion, and that's why you're gradually able to let go of attachment and clinging and grasping, of the five aggregates. That's where you go through the different stages of enlightenment. So from this AN 4.41, I just want to highlight to you that it's very, very important, because it will then also set the tone and also the stage for us to consider how we should meditate. Whenever, for example, like I always highlight to you, in terms of always anchoring your mindfulness on the six sense objects, right? And also see how your mind reacts, to the six sense objects, through your six sense basis, and how you contemplate these five aggregates through your six sense basis, right? You must always see, how do these arise, through contemplating the causes and conditions and the dependent arising of this. So if you're able to practice this, then the Buddha says, that you're able to, you're practicing towards the ending, of the defilements and the affluence. If not, then you are just practicing to actually, improve, on your sati, and your alertness. It doesn't lead to the eradication, or the complete extinguishment of suffering. So this actually is something that's very important as we practice the Dhamma, because as you know, the Buddha Sasana, is still very much alive, and very much accessible to us, and we are now on this very, what the Buddha says, is the auspicious kappa, where we have, so many Buddhas that have arisen, right? We have Kakusanda Buddha, Kodagamana Buddha, we have Kassapa Buddha, and we have got Gautama Buddha, right? And of course, we have this Metteyya Bodhisattva who is now in Tusita heaven, who's will come to the earth, at the appropriate time, to actually turn the wheel of the Dhamma. But these five Sammasambuddhas will arise in this very auspicious kappa that we have, and we've really missed the chance, of actually meeting and learning the Dhamma from these four Sammasambuddhas. But the Dhamma is still very much, accessible to us. That's why it is important for us to understand the true teaching of the Buddha, as the in our spiritual quest and so a spiritual practice. We must actually understand what the Buddha actually has taught for us to practice. We should try to have an open mind and not just follow blindly, what others tell us, in terms of how to practice. But we must always go back to the suttas and understand, what is this Sampajanna that the Buddha taught about? Is it just looking at things come and go, or is there actually more to it, by looking at the condition arising and cessation, and to realize non-self nature and also the emptiness of sankharas and your five aggregates, as the means to develop, Sampajanna, So if you practice it, how you practice it, whether you practice it, in accordance with what the Buddha has taught, or you practice it, which actually, which is perhaps not in accordance or deviates, then it will also then affect, whether, you actually will be able to realize, the right knowledge, and the right samadhi, and the noble eightfold path, or whether you are actually doing something that's actually not in accordance with what Buddha has taught. So we need to then be very clear, in terms of what the Buddha has taught, in terms of this Sampajanna, and also to then heed the advice of the Buddha, that whenever we practice the Dhamma, always go back to, what the Buddha has actually taught, or what the Buddha has actually what he has actually expounded in the suttas, rather than just listen, on face value what others tell us and just assume that's the correct way of practicing, but always go back to what the Buddha actually says, and we can see from these suttas that this Sampajanna is, is something, that what the Buddha has actually taught, we should practice on Sampajanna, not just in terms of being fully aware, but also to make sure that we see the condition arising of all these sankharas and five aggregates. So So if you read the suttas, right, the Buddha in many suttas actually spoke a lot. I think he actually taught in many suttas. If you see that, it runs through all the suttas. The Buddha invariably always talks about non-self. As the final as the final realization that we should practice. And if you see from this, you see, the Buddha says, if for you to decide whether you are practicing in accordance with the Dhamma or not, right? The Buddha says, that you should actually dwell contemplating anicca, in relation to your 5 aggregates. Okay, that is what the Buddha says. But you see, the Buddha didn't stop at just anicca. The Buddha says, you should actually also contemplate dukkha, and you should then contemplate anatta as well. So if you practice contemplating using Sampajanna to understand non-self nature, then you are practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. But if you just practice to just realize anicca and impermanence alone, and it's actually not in accordance with what the Buddha has actually taught. And if you see this SN 22.15 as well, you see the Buddha says here, the form is impermanent. What is it? They say bhikkhus, the form is impermanent. The form on the 5 aggregates. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is non-self. What is non-self should be seen as it really is, with correct wisdom does. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. You see, the Buddha didn't just stop at asking the bhikkhus to just contemplate anicca, but also dukkha and anatta. Okay, this is from SN 22.15. And in 22.16, the Buddha says, if you contemplate form is suffering, then you should continue to contemplate what is suffering is also non-self. And what is non-self should be seen as it really is. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So in the Dhamma, when you say mine, it means something that is independent of causes and conditions, then you can call a self. This is what the Buddha says. When you say something is not mine, something is not myself, it means your 5 aggregates are not dependent on causes and conditions. So it's precisely because it's non-self, therefore our 5 aggregates are dependent on causes and conditions. And when you contemplate suffering, you must also contemplate dukkha and proceed to contemplate non-self. And the last one, Buddha says that form is non-self. Here the Buddha talks about 5 aggregates being non-self. So you can see from the suttas here, the Buddha whenever the Buddha teaches the monks on anicca, right? The Buddha doesn't just stop at anicca. He asked the monk to contemplate anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And if you're contemplating dukkha, you must continue to contemplate anatta. And only when you contemplate anatta, then you are actually then reaching the final essence of the true Dhamma. Where you're able to then you're practicing towards realizing the true Dhamma, and for you to then realize the various stages of enlightenment. Because once you realize this non-self, then you begin to let go. You don't cling that much anymore, and there's you don't grasp at things because precisely it's empty. There's nothing there. It's just an interplay of causes and conditions. What's there to hold on to? Eventually they change. You can't help. You can't really control. It's beyond you. And there's no self to it that you can say that it's going to be there forever. And once you are able to realize this at your personal experiential level, that's where your faith becomes avijja pasada, avijja pasada, which means it becomes a firm verified experiential confidence, like what a Sotapanna has. Then you begin to realize that what the Buddha has taught is intrinsically true. I don't need to actually have a firm faith in what the Buddha taught, but I know it because it's true. Because I've experienced it myself, by contemplating non-self in relation to my 5 aggregates and all the sankharas. So this is something that we need to understand. So I think in a nutshell, what I'm trying to share with you today is actually to highlight to you that this Sampajanna, is a very, very important, and very deep and profound teaching of the our Buddha, our blessed one. It is something that is been taught time and time again in so many suttas, about sati sampajanna, and if you look at the suttas, what the Buddha is asking us to practice is not just looking at observing things come and go, and seeing is impermanent, but it's more than that, It's not just being mindful alone, mindful of this. Mindfulness alone is not good, is not enough. But you must continue to practice a higher level of sampajanna, where you're able to see the non-self nature, how things are dependently arisen through causes and conditions, how all these conditioned existence, all these sankharas, they are actually intrinsically empty, this sunyata, that you finally realize there's nothing to grasp to, nothing to cling to, That's where, you're able to then see the Four Noble Truths in a very, very deep and profound manner, and you're able to understand, why craving leads to dukkha, and why and how the eradication of the dukkha can come about if you abandon craving. Only if you understand the First Noble Truth. The First Noble Truth, the Buddha says, the five aggregates are actually suffering, and why is it suffering? Because the five aggregates are non-self. They are forever changing, There's no permanent unchanging self. But if you don't see that, then forever there's craving, there's clinging, and because of that, you're not able to abandon, the Third Noble Truth. And the Fourth Noble Truth is actually how you practice in order for you to understand, about the truth about dukkha, about the eradication of dukkha and the cause and eradication of dukkha. So if you're able to see this at a deep, profound level, then you're able to see the Four Noble Truths, And that's why if you see the previous suttas, all the suttas, right? Like for example, all the Uga, and also for example, the Super Buddha, and all this, leper, the Uga, and also like General Siha, they became Sotapanna just by listening to what the Buddha said. And the Buddha actually, in the gradual discourse of the Buddha actually spoke about the Four Noble Truths, and it's actually about the non-self nature of the sankharas. And once you listen it, with this Yuniso Manasikara, that's where this Dhamma-I arises in you. So I would actually encourage all of you, all of us, in fact, to practice Sampajanna, in accordance with what the Buddha mentioned, like AN 4.41, that we must always look at it in terms of dependent arising, how does it happen? Instead of just seeing it in terms of it comes and goes, and that is just sharpening our mindfulness, and alertness, but it doesn't lead to the ending of the asavas, So I will leave you on this note, on this Sampajanna, and hopefully, in future Dhamma discussions, I can go further, go deeper into this Sampajanna as to how we should practice, in order for us to actually realize this Sampajanna. Today, I'm just giving you a nutshell, of the difference between, Sampajanna, in the sense of just developing mindfulness and alertness, and the other end of a Sampajanna, which entails wisdom that will actually result in the arising and development of wisdom for us to, eradicate all the asavas. So I will leave this, leave you with this, these two juxtaposed positions, from the suttas itself. So from here, we can have a better appreciation when someone tells you Sampajanna. So your next question is, what level of Sampajanna are you referring to? Is it the Sampajanna by just being fully aware, or is it the Sampajanna that entails wisdom? So we can actually be more intelligent when somebody tells you Sati Sampajanna.